Today we didn't have mother's music, and we didn't have even nature's music, we had human music. And it is a symbol, very interesting symbol, because of course there is a music in nature. Before man came upon earth, the music of the sea, of the winds, the music that one can hear by tuning to the silence on the peaks. Even the music of humming of the birds and the bees and the swan, the roar of a lion, and all these together in a kind of rhythm against a background of silence that prevails in nature. And then, of course, we are so fortunate we have mother's music, music brought down from the highest planes of inspiration. But today we had a taste of the common human music, the sound of the cars and the other things. And in this music also, Aurobindo tells us, if we go to its source, in its essence, there is the same power which sustains it and brings it forth into existence. The good part is that human consciousness is a passage, and that's what we have been reading last few weeks from Aurobindo. The passage from our present human existence to a greater diviner existence. We have been asked to see divine in everything and everywhere, in each and every event and circumstance. And the human intellect, which lives always in division, instantly raises a question: then how are we to act? As if the divine doesn't act. He acts with a much greater power and much greater fullness upon this world, even though all is He and nothing but Himself. Even as we have in the image of the Gita, Sri Krishna engaging Himself in the most terrible action. And yet He says, even though there is nothing which I have to gain personally, yet I act, for if I do not act, these worlds will collapse and sink into inertia. Such is the action of a liberated consciousness towards which Aurobindo is bidding us to rise. Equality is not indifference. Equality is freedom from the stress of egoistic choice, of all the various preferences that constantly come and interfere in both our decision making and the choice of action, even the process of action. We live as if constantly under a stress from the egoistic consciousness, which constantly shifts the needle of action into this or that preferred direction. And this preferred direction is usually dictated by the results with regard to ourselves. Keeping ourselves in the center, we act. So much so that even when we stand before the divine, there is only one thing we have in mind: how is it going to benefit us? People ask these questions to Mother, that now that the supermind has come, how is it going to benefit me? How is it going to help me? Whereas in yoga we are asked to rise to a consciousness far greater and to act from that. In fact, as we read last time, Aurobindo is telling us, revealing to us, that one can hardly say in that state that one acts. Action develops spontaneously. And this spontaneity is not the spontaneity of the vital impulse. The difference between the spontaneity of the vital impulse and the spontaneity of the higher intuition is very simple. Vital impulse always is accompanied, preceded, and even in its result, it carries a kind of restlessness. There is a kind of stress of choice and a desired result that causes right from the beginning till the end a restlessness. It is not the nature of action which actually decides whether a thing is a vital impulse or from a higher consciousness. Whereas an action from the higher consciousness always carries within itself, at the inception, during the process of execution, and at the end, a deep calm, a vastness. It's like a giant tsunami arising from the depth of the ocean. And to enter into this vastness, again, Sri Aurobindo has revealed to us, we must learn to stand back and apart from the inferior mode of working of the nature, its three gunas, which constantly dictate all our action. So if we learn to stand back and to quieten our mind, the restless vital, our mind is constantly agitated by all kinds of ideas, opinions, conventions, habits of thought, customary ways of looking at things. And as long as we are driven by them, we cannot really understand the true knowledge which dawns when the consciousness is liberated from the covenants of conception. There is a beautiful line in Savitri where Sri Aurobindo speaks of the covenants of conception. They drop away and mind's limiting firmaments went rolling back. So all these are like little prisons. We don't realize it. We are so habituated to live in this prison. And yoga is about liberation. Not only liberation in terms of knowledge, but liberation also in action. Because a liberation which is purely on some peaks of a philosophical abstraction doesn't help us. So even in consciousness there has to be liberation. So long as action is performed with desires as the whiplash and with certain results as preferred things, the action cannot be a yogin's action. Sri Aurobindo at one place very beautifully remarks, this also from his early writings, he picks up this one phrase from the Gita, yoga is skill in works, yogaha karmasu kaushlam. And he says that if yoga is skill in works, means only that the yogin must act with the human perfection, then a thief who steals very well, or a clever lawyer, or a great orator, politicians are great orators. Sometimes not a good thing to hear that you are a great orator, because one immediately thinks of politicians who have the power to convince everybody with their oratory skills. So it's not about any of those things. One may have these things in abundance and yet be very far from yoga. It is the consciousness from which it proceeds. In fact, the deeper one goes, the more one discovers, as Sri Aurobindo would again reveal to us, that Buddha sitting under the bo tree is engaged in a vast and mighty action. The heart of the devotee, throbbing with love for the divine beloved, is pouring streams of sweetness and ananda into this world. What is this action? He's not going everywhere and saying, oh, I am very kind to you, I am very nice to you. He's doing none of those things. But by the very fact that his heart is open to an infinity of love, to an infinity of sweetness, to an infinity of beatitude, those currents, using his body as a pedestal or a channel or an instrument, pour out upon the world. It is said that in the nearness, even in the company of such a person, even the elements begin to receive it. It's very beautifully, I think earlier we have shared this. It is said that in the presence of a yogi, even ferocious animals lose their ferocity. This is the kind of effect that the consciousness can have, and it's a very silent, occult action. It doesn't mean that the yogin cannot engage in a powerful action. We have the Gita, and Sri Aurobindo himself says that I do not think of business as any more tainted than any other action. And then he gives his own example. It's something very interesting. Sri Aurobindo speaks in the Gita of God's own example. He says, I have myself engaged in politics, and politics of the worst kind, ghoram karmam. And yet, therefore, I could say, in fact, if we really look at Sri Aurobindo from 1907, toward the end of which he had already been liberated in the consciousness of nirvana, onto the cosmic consciousness and the Vasudevam Sarvamiti realization, he was engaged in all kinds of actions that human consciousness would find not compatible with yoga. He was going to number of places. Meet Nalnida describes it very beautifully. What was Sri Aurobindo's routine when he was going for talks in different places. He was giving speeches. They are now, a very powerful document. And he says how he would go. He was accompanying him to many of the places. And what will be his routine like? He would wake up in the morning at 6, and how he would prepare and how he would go and how he would be received. I don't want to disclose all this because this is going to come out partly in All India Magazine. So this is just a little promo, not the full picture. So it's about the action of a yogin, which is so very different from the way our human action proceeds. As this action grows or comes or arises from an inspiration, through an inspiration or an intuition from higher and higher consciousness, new faculties of knowledge begin to dawn in us. So it's not only about action from a greater consciousness which is vast and calm, but also a different way of knowing, a different way of responding to all the challenges of the world. And this is the kind of road to transformation that Aurobindo is asking us to take, or rather a road which begins to appear as one engages more and more deeply and deeply into the process of yoga. Not only the action proceeds from a different consciousness, even knowledge begins to proceed from a very different consciousness. Even love and all relationships begin to proceed on a very different basis altogether. And that is why it's so difficult to understand a yogin's action. With regard to, we have this instance in the Upanishad when Yajnavalkya is asked by Maitreyi that what is the basis of relationship in life? And Yajnavalkya says, not for the sake of the other, but for the sake of the self. Sri Aurobindo elaborates it at great length in the Guru-Student Samvad. He says, in the lower nature, it is based on the egoistic self. We love the other for the sake of our egoistic self. What am I going to get out of it? In the higher consciousness also, he says, and that is the true basis of universal brotherhood. That and that alone, and not a mental association, can be the true basis. He says, next, we love, but for the sake of the higher self. No more for getting any kind of egoistic satisfaction or fulfillment of desire, wishes, demands, and all the 100 things that tie and mar and turn relationships into a sweet bitter thing. But something which is deep and vast, something which is full of beatitude which doesn't fade. We have these beautiful poems of Sri Aurobindo. There is a very beautiful sonnet called Immortal Love, where he speaks of that love which transcends all appearances, transcends time, transcends qualities, and yet is there as a self-existent reality. So this is the growth of consciousness, and in the Vedas it's described very picturesquely as the growth of the gods in man. Even the mother prays in one of her prayers, she records this kind of growth. She speaks of, in fact she invokes Indra, she invokes Agni. Be resplendent in me, O Agni. Be splendid in me, O Indra. And then she invokes the Lord Mitra, who is the Lord of love. Then she invokes, O sublime love, whom I never gave any name. So she invokes them just like a Vedic prayer. And in these Vedic prayers, these gods are invoked as powers and aspects of the higher consciousness. So the higher consciousness is not a neutral, blank witness. It is a consciousness which is far more perfect, far more powerful. And its action engages us with the world in a much more beautiful way, much more deeper way, much more truer way. When someone asks Sri Aurobindo that, does the supermind take interest in these worldly affairs? Normally we have this concept of worldly and otherworldly. He says, it takes interest, but in quite another way than human beings take. Because we are all the time looking at this world from only one lens, the lens of the ego. And when that lens drops away, and as the calm and the quiet grows into the being, another kind of vision begins to appear, and that begins to look at the hidden forces, hidden aspects of existence, and the clash of forces, and the direction, and above all the universal will which is behind all this, and it's taking us in a certain direction. One becomes more and more in tune with the Zeitgeist, the time spirit. That is what Sri Aurobindo tells us. And that in fact makes our action not only flawless and perfect, but one may say, if one may use the word, sure to succeed, because one is in tune with the universal will. So we'll read something about this aspect of works. As the state of being changes, or maybe just a sentence before that, this is again Collected Works of Aurobindo, volume 13. There's a very beautiful essay, Yoga and Skill in Works. It is evident that such an increasing wideness of vision must mean an increasing knowledge. And if it be true that knowledge is power, it must mean also an increasing force for works. Certainly, it would not be so if the yogin continued to act by the light of his individual reason and imagination and will. For the intellect and all that depends on it can only work by virtue of rigid limitations and exclusive determinations. This is the problem of intellect, that it can either take this position or that position or a neutral position. The intellect cannot act in a way that it can harmonize the opposites even while it is engaged in a very mighty action. It's very interesting that in the Gita, when the whole battle is over, then Sri Krishna was evidently on the side of the Pandavas, so to say. And all are, after the war is over, all the people from the Pandava army, the warriors, they are praising themselves that I was the one who killed so many and I was the one who killed so many. And then they go and ask this Barbaric, whose head has been placed on a mountain top. It's a whole story, but we'll not go into that. That you saw the whole war as a witness. What did you see? Who do you think is the greatest warrior? He says, I saw only one thing. In fact, the head laughs. He says, I saw only one thing. I saw Krishna on this side and I saw Krishna on that side. Now it's amazing that though he has put himself deliberately and willfully and consciously on the side of the Pandavas, yet his action is an all-encompassing action. That is the kind of action of the yogin, where it doesn't take positions the way our intellect takes. Intellect takes based on rigid determinations and limitations. Accordingly, the continued activity of the unillumined intellect and its servants conflicts with the new state of consciousness and knowledge which arises out of this larger existence. The intellect can often come in conflict with this larger existence, which is no more based on our usual mental conceptions. But the yogin ceases progressively to act by the choice of his intellectual or emotional nature. That's what Aurobindo says. There is a very beautiful chapter in the synthesis where Aurobindo speaks of the supreme will and how to identify this will. So this action begins to arise as a spontaneous inspiration, as a kind of direct intuition which carries within it the entire process of the action and the power to execute it. Another light dawns, another power and presence intervenes, other faculties awake in the place of the old human-animal combination. This is the path of yoga, where even new faculties of knowing and faculties which can see at beyond large spaces of time begin to emerge. As the state of being changes, the will and temperament must necessarily be modified. Even from an early stage, the yogin begins to subordinate his personal will, or it becomes naturally subordinate to the sense of the supreme will, which is attracting him upward. So this is the master clue. The more we learn to subordinate the personal will, and as we read in the Gita, Aurobindo speaks about it at great length, the thing that is to be practiced constantly is not to do actions with a will for a particular result or reward. The more we cease inwardly from this constant craving for a particular reward or a particular result, whether it be personal, whether it be collective, whether it be for even for the most highest action, if we can inwardly, even while we are engaged in action, leave the result entirely in the hands of the divine who determines everything, the more the action begins to become more and more powerful. Ignorantly, imperfectly, blunderingly it moves at first, with many recoils and relapses into personal living and personal action. But in time it becomes more in tune with its source. How much ever time it may take. In fact, Sri Aurobindo speaks of in 1947 when he gives that message of on the Independence Day, and he says very beautifully how some of the great events for which he had put his will in action, he could see its fruition during his lifetime. Some of the events he had set the will in motion long back, decades back, and slowly molding the entire world forces, world consciousness, they begin to take shape. And that is why one of the greatest qualities in yoga is dhira. Repeatedly Sri Aurobindo tells us that he who is dhira is fit for immortality. The temperament also is delivered from all leash and straining and desire, from all urge of passion and pain of willful self-delusion. Desire, even the best, turns always to limitation and obscuration. It generates anger and grief and passion and obstinacy, and these bring about the soul's loss of its divine memory. This is the whole sequence of decline or a fall from yoga, or even fall from a state of reason, which is described in the Gita, that how when we are moved by desire, we get immediate little satisfaction followed by frustration, frustration leading to anger, anger leading to loss of memory of the self, and this loss of memory of the self leading to a complete degeneration and degradation, pranashyati. So Sri Aurobindo is telling us the first thing that we have to learn is this freedom from acting from the stress of egoistic choice and desire. Then what happens as a result of this? But the greatest skill of works in yoga, is that which to the animal man seems its greatest ineptitude. For all this difficult attainment, the latter will say, may lead to anything you please, but we have to lose our personal life. So one will say, at this rate, all that is fine, but such a person will have nothing like a personal life, and he will be only living in some kind of a rarefied atmosphere with no touch or hold upon practical things. Abandon our personal objects, annul our personal will and pleasure, and without these, life cannot be worth living. Now, the object of all skill in works must be evidently to secure the best welfare either of ourselves or of others or of all. The ordinary man calls it welfare to secure momentarily some transient object. For us, that is the greatest welfare. As we have been seeing, even God should be at our service 24/7. Not a moment he should sleep. If he sleeps, there is chaos. The ordinary man calls it welfare to secure momentarily some transient object, to wade for it through a sea of grief and suffering and painful labor. At the end of life, we have strained and struggled and suffered. All life, whether we like it or not, is sacrifice. Whether we like it or not, because that is the law of this universe. But what we get at the end of this sacrifice, where so much pain, struggle, bitterness, grief, little satisfaction, and so precariously held, at the end of it, we simply are ready for a place 3 feet by 6 feet, or maybe good for the fire. The greatest cunning of yoga. What a beautiful language. The greatest cunning of yoga is to have detected this cheat of the mind. So this is the cunning of yoga. It detects this cheat of the mind, that look, what is it towards which I am straining? At the end of it, even if I get it, even if all the 3 worlds were at my disposal, this is the difference between the sacrifice and the tapasya of the asuric temperament and the sacrifice and tapasya of the godlike nature. The asura also does tapasya. In fact, he does sometimes a far greater tapasya. And when he is asked, what do you want? He rattles out a whole list of things which will satisfy and aggrandize his ego. And therefore, he must pass away, he must be vanquished and surpassed. Whereas the godlike temperament, at the end of the tapasya, what does he want? To live and grow more and more in God consciousness. This is his only reward. We have these beautiful stories. In Nachiketa, in fact, his path begins with that. When Nachiketa is asked by death, Nachiketa, what do you want? And Nachiketa asks for 3 boons. One of them is, tell me the secret of immortality. Death tells him, no, nothing doing. Why don't you take termless power, enjoyment, luxuries, comforts, everything you want? And Nachiketa asks him one question. Tell me, will it be given to me forever, or there is a time limit to it? And death says to Nachiketa, one day I will come and take these away. So Nachiketa, this is the symbol of the Nachiketa, the mind, which is able to detect this cheat, that whatever I may give today is going to be taken away. There is a very beautiful line in Savitri, where Aurobindo reminds this very powerfully, that how this knowledge cannot satisfy us, because its knowledge and power are the gifts of time. There is something within us which can never be satisfied by this, because they are gifts of time, and one day time takes them away. So here is the greatest skill. So Aurobindo is telling us the greatest cunning of yoga is to have detected this cheat of the mind and its desires and dualities, and to have found the way to an abiding peace, a universal delight, and an all-embracing satisfaction, which can not only be enjoyed for oneself, but communicated to others. What a beautiful thing it is. The other day I was reading a very nice advertisement, that you must do this so that you can be happy, and you should be happy so that you can make others happy. It's so beautiful, such a simple thing. And it takes so much time to simply realize the simple truth that unless we are in a state of peace and happiness, we cannot give happiness to others. So Aurobindo is reminding us in a very powerful way that a yogin begins to live in a state of abiding peace, a universal delight, and an all-embracing satisfaction, which can not only be enjoyed for oneself but communicated to others. That too arises out of the change of our being, for the pure truth of existence carries in it the unalloyed delight of existence. They are inseparable in the status of the infinite. So true knowledge, Aurobindo describes in Savitri, a golden file of joy. When knowledge pours into the consciousness, it also brings joy. This is the beauty of this divine knowledge. That it's not knowledge which is dry and abstract with great strain of the analytical mind. One is arriving at it, and before one has caught it, one loses it. Because, it never carried with it the touch of the infinite. It was the mind straining to its utmost. Whereas when one gets the touch of true knowledge, it carries with it a spontaneous delight. And this delight is so beautifully communicated. One is constantly reminded of what was it that even now when we look at a picture of the mother's smile, the heart is filled with joy. That is the delight which still communicates to us and continues to communicate. Just to look at her smile, to look at her face, and one's heart is filled with delight. So here is that delight of existence. They are inseparable in the status of the infinite. To use the figures of the Vedic seers, so now we have this growth of the gods that gives us the secret also of the 33 crore gods of the Indian pantheon. These are powers and aspects of the infinite, and based on the numeral 3. So the 3 are the 3 planes of mind, life and body, and if we go deep behind them, they are the powers of cosmic existence, and they multiply endlessly. And each of these gods is a personality in itself which can awaken in a human being. In fact, according to occult tradition, there are 365 personalities, of which just one human being is capable of. It's amazing. And we are aware just of 1 or 2 or 3. So this is the kind of perfection that one can arise at. To use the figure of the Vedic seers, by yoga, Varuna is born in us. A vast sky of spiritual living. Who is Varuna? He is vastness. So when we begin to live in a vastness, then we can say rightfully that Varuna is born in us. And that is why we have the Vedic legend of the Varuna taking away the three pashas, the knots of Shunyashipa. We have alluded to this legend earlier. These are the three knots of the ego. In the mind, the ego knot is tied with all the opinions, ideas, conventions. In the heart and the vital being, the knot of desire, and the very physical matter, the knot which is at the very base of existence. And the vaster we grow, these knots begin to automatically loosen out. So we have the birth of Varuna, a vast sky of spiritual living, the divine in his wide existence and infinite truth. Into that wideness, Mitra rises up. So Varuna and Mitra are great friends. And Mitra comes when Varuna comes. When Varuna is there, Mitra automatically comes. And Mitra is the god of love. There is a very beautiful passage in Savitri describing why love came to Savitri and came to dwell in her being. And Aurobindo ends with these remarkable lines: in her, he found his own eternity. He moved in her as in his natural home, because love in her was wider than the universe. So when we are so wide by the touch of Varuna, then Mitra, the god of love, is automatically born. Not the love which we call today by that name, which is nothing but an egoistic straining after animal satisfactions, but true love. Mitra rises up, Lord of light and love, who takes all our activities of thought and feeling and will, links them into a divine harmony, charioteers our movement and dictates our works. Called by this wideness and this harmony, Ahriman appears in us. So Ahriman is another god, the god of divine strength, the divine in its illumined power, uplifted force of being, and all judging effective will. And by the three comes the indwelling Bhaga. So this higher consciousness is not a neutral blank that equality makes us very dull, insipid. That's the mind's conception of equality. That's the mind's conception of a higher consciousness. Even an all-embracing calm becomes an all-powerful action. So we have already the birth of these three gods, Varuna, Mitra, and Ahriman, the god of vastness, or the divine in his vast aspect of infinite truth, the divine in his infinite power of light and love, and the divine in his infinite strength. And then comes Bhaga, the divine in his pure bliss and all-seizing joy. The enjoyment that arises in that state is a joy which cannot be taken away by anything. Even the smallest thing, object, becomes an occasion, or even if there is no occasion, one dwells in a state of infinite joy. That is God Bhaga. All-seizing joy, who dispels the evil dream of our jarring and divided existence and possesses all things in the light and glory of Ahriman's power, Mitra's love and light, Varuna's unity. The divine birth shall be the sun of our works, and then creating this, what greater skill can there be, or what more practical and sovereign cunning? So here skill, Aurobindo using the word of cunning and perfection, and all these spontaneously become better and better as the consciousness grows in yoga. We will end with this prayer which Aurobindo has. It's from thought and aphorism, but it's actually a prayer. It's in the form of a prayer. It's in volume 10, Collected Works of Mother, on page 84, where Aurobindo invokes all these gods to grow in his being. And as we know that this is around the time the mother has said about thoughts and aphorisms, that they were written around the time when Aurobindo was passing from the intuitive mind to the supramental consciousness. And she says he was as if piercing through the layers. So that's why we have the paradoxes coming in constantly. The paradoxes where on one side he speaks of hell and heaven, on the other side he speaks of reconciling them. So constantly, because from intuitive mind he is rising to that consciousness. So these gods belong to that plane, the plane of the higher sphere. Be wide in me, O Varuna. So, this is the state of consciousness towards which he is bidding us to rise. Not to be small, not to be narrow, not to be limited, but wide and vast. Be mighty in me, O Indra. So he is asking us not to be like weaklings and cowards, but to be mighty and strong. O sun, be very bright and luminous, not to live in darkness and obscurity. O moon, be full of charm and sweetness. So yoga does not make us again devoid of sweetness. It gives us another kind of sweetness and warmth, not the human sweetness, not the other sweetness which sometimes can be very deceptive, but a natural sweetness which is an outflowering of the soul. Be fierce and terrible, O Rudra. So it is not the sweetness which is the sweetness of the weakling, but the sweetness which can engage itself in mighty battles if need be. There is a very beautiful little episode in the Mahabharata, in the Ramayana, when Rama has broken the giant bow of Shiva. Parsuram suddenly lands up and he says, "Who has broken this? And I am going to punish this man. Who has done it?" And everybody is stunned with silence because Parsuram is full of anger and he is so powerful that even the great warriors shiver before him. Bhishma and Karna are supposed to have been trained under him. So when he comes, everybody is shivering with fear and terror. And Rama is quiet. And Lakshmana engages himself in a great verbal duel. At the end of it, Parsuram is infuriated and he says, "You are a little child, that's why I was keeping quiet. But I think now you deserve my wrath." So he says, "I think it's enough is enough and I am going to take on you and within minutes your head will go rolling off." Then Rama speaks. Till then, he is an image of sweetness and calm and peace. He is trying to pacify. He is trying to quieten. But then Rama speaks. And when he speaks, he says, I have been very quiet listening to this entire conversation. But if you are really so keen on war, I am ready for it. Because when it comes to battle, we are not afraid even of death. And that makes him realize that he is face to face with none other than the divine incarnate. So here we have this beautiful reconciliation of opposites in the higher consciousness. In the lower consciousness, one is either sweet or one is terrible. And here we have very beautifully the two reconcile in the higher consciousness. Be, O moon, be full of charm and sweetness. Be fierce and terrible, O Rudra. In synthesis, Aurobindo speaks of reconciling these two opposites as one of the challenges of sadhana. In fact, he says Saumyata and Raudrata are two things to reconcile which is very difficult. It's like putting two gods which act very differently in the same house. And perhaps that would explain why even the gods fight amongst each other. O Rudra, be impetuous and swift, O Maruts. Be strong and bold, O Ariman. Be voluptuous and pleasurable, O Bhag. Be tender and kind and loving and passionate, O Mitra. What a consciousness he is bidding us to rise. Everything that we find at the human level in a degraded way, Aurobindo is inviting us to rise to that where all these are reconciled in a very beautiful way. O dawn, be bright and revealing, O dawn. O night, be solemn and pregnant. When we begin to live in the higher consciousness, then when the nights come, we are no more down in the dumps, but we learn to wait for the light which is going to emerge, a greater light. In ordinary consciousness, when night comes and difficult times come, one loses hope, one loses heart, one goes into depression. Whereas when one is living in a higher consciousness and everything is clouded, then one is solemn and knows that night is the waiting for a greater dawn. So here we have this beautiful expression, O night, be solemn and pregnant. O life, be full, ready and buoyant. O death, lead my steps from mansion to mansion. harmonize all these. O Brahmanaspati. And then comes the master stroke. Let me not be subject to these gods, O Kali. So at the end of invoking all these gods, he says, even when they come, I want to be their master and not their slaves. Because men can be driven by these gods. Even these greater powers and greater energies and swifter actions and beautiful upsurgings of the light and love and ananda in our being we should not be their slave but their master. And who can liberate us but Kali from all these gods? So we are no more their subject, but they become, these consciousness, these powers, these energies become offered to the divine in us and to be used only by the divine and guided by the divine will. So this is just a little foretaste, a little glimpse, as we use the modern term promo, of what the higher consciousness can do to us. Aurobindo says in one of the aphorisms, if human beings had just a little glimpse of what lies in this beyond, they would be ready and willing to sacrifice everything for its sake. What sweetness, what beatitude, what strength, what power, what wisdom, what hope. And this is the human journey from man to Superman. We will continue next week.